Hello and welcome to The Case For, a Baseball Hall of Fame podcast. I'm your host, attorney and baseball fan extraordinaire, Russell Christian. On each episode of this podcast, I examine a different Major League Baseball player's career and I make the case for whether I believe the player does or does not deserve enshrinement in the National Baseball Hall of Fame and Museum in Cooperstown, New York. If you're someone whose Christmas list includes bobbleheads and baseball cards, then this is the podcast for you. Friendly reminder, I've never played professional baseball. I'm just a fan. I'm also an attorney, and believe me when I say it's way more fun to discuss the pros and cons of a player's hall-worthiness than it is to read the case of Penoyer versus Neff. There's a throwback for all you former law students. You're probably getting PTSD just hearing that case name. Today's superfan shout-out goes to Booney, the host of the popular Locked On A's podcast. I mentioned Booney in my last episode about Kenny Lofton, so it's time to give Booney a proper shout-out. Booney has had me on his podcast several times before to talk about the Hall of Fame, the A's, their move to Las Vegas, and tons of other topics related to the soon-to-be Las Vegas Athletics. You can follow Booney on Twitter X at LockedOnA's. Booney does great work and is super passionate about baseball and his A's, so give him a follow and make sure to add Locked On A's to your podcast download list. Now, before we get started on today's episode, we've got a great episode. I really want to take a quick moment to reflect upon the recent passing of singer-songwriter Todd Snider. I've mentioned Todd numerous times before on this podcast and on my Twitter X account, particularly in reference to his song America's Favorite Pastime, which is about the famous Doc Ellis June 12, 1970 no-hitter, which according to Ellis was pitched while under the influence of the drug LSD. I'm not condoning, but it is a famous story in baseball history. But Snider was more than just one song. He was a great writer, one of the greatest writers of modern American folk music, and an incredible storyteller. If you've got some time, do yourself a huge favor. Go down a YouTube rabbit hole of Todd Snider telling stories before he plays his song. They are wildly entertaining, so much so that he published a book of his greatest stories in 2014 called I Never Met a Story I Didn't Like, Mostly True Tall Tales, which is a highly entertaining read. Highly recommend it. In addition to some of his more well-known humorous stories, it also includes some interesting behind-the-scenes stories of a life in show business, including a story about Todd playing in a celebrity golf tournament with Roger Clemens, one of the subject of today's episode. Baseball fans will certainly love Chapter 3 of Todd's book entitled The Beef, where Todd talks about playing baseball growing up and about Todd Francis, a.k.a. The Beef, the best baseball player in Todd's hometown of Beaverton, Oregon. I won't spoil the chapter, but it's a fascinating insight into the lives and dreams of aspiring Major League Baseball stars. If you listen to this podcast, you know I love telling the origin stories of players, and sometimes I spend as much time, if not more, telling the stories about their high school, college, and minor league careers as I do their big league careers. Without spoiling it, Todd's story about Todd the Beef Francis is quite universal. Every town has their hometown hero athletes, and when we're young, we all just assume that every athlete will go on to be a huge star someday. But the reality of Major League Baseball is that every town has a Todd Francis, and all of those Todd Francises get drafted into the minors, where they play against other Todd Francises, and only the best players make the big leagues, let alone become stars, and of the stars, only a small percentage of those go on to the Hall of Fame. So I definitely recommend the book I Never Met a Story I Didn't Like, Mostly True Tall Tales by Todd Snider, if you enjoy baseball, music, and just generally interesting and humorous storytelling in general. When Todd Snider passed away, many people compared his storytelling abilities to Mark Twain, his humor to Mitch Hedberg, and his songwriting abilities to John Prine. If that doesn't pique your interest and curiosity to discover more about this modern Renaissance man, I just don't know what will. I mentioned on social media posts that Todd was, quote, your favorite songwriter's favorite songwriter, and indeed after his passing there have been tributes from numerous musicians. I even saw Jack Johnson posting a video performing a Todd Snider song, and the bands Billy Strings and Widespread Panic played Todd Snider songs during their shows last week. I could spend a whole episode eulogizing Todd Snider, but I'll just say personally that he meant a lot to me as an inspiration to pursue music, writing, and other creative endeavors, including this podcast. If you didn't know, in addition to the podcast, I write, record, and release songs under my name, and I've been a working, performing musician for years. Little trivia for you, all the intro and outro music you hear on this podcast, those are my songs. So I'd like to think that this podcast is a fun, intersection of baseball and music. If you're a fan of the podcast, you know I've had songwriters Dan Byrne and Chuck Brodsky on this podcast, and having Todd Snyder on this podcast was a dream of mine. I actually reached out to his people earlier this year about trying to have him on the podcast, but I never heard back. Obviously, now I know he was busy recording his final album, and now I know he's dealing with some other health issues, so farewell, Todd Snyder. You were an inspiration to many, a wonderful songwriter, storyteller, and a genuinely kind soul, and the world will miss you dearly. There are so many poignant Todd Snyder lyrics I could quote here, but as a farewell, I'd like to quote a favorite line of mine from his song Can't Complain, because it relates to baseball and because Snyder himself said it was his favorite song. The line is, "We're all waiting in the dugout, thinking we should pitch. How you gonna throw a shutout if all you do is bitch?" Great line and a great song. So Godspeed, Todd. We will miss you very dearly. Today's episode is a very special episode. I'm going to be breaking down the 2025 Contemporary Baseball Era Ballot. If you recall, there are two paths to induction into Cooperstown. The first route is to be inducted by the Baseball Writers Association of America. This is the main path to induction, and I've discussed how it works in detail in episodes 12, 13, 22, and 23. Go check those out if you want more information. The other way to get inducted into the Hall of Fame is to be voted by what are called the Era Committees. For years, they used to be called the Veterans Committee, and I still call them that. I might call them that during the course of this episode, so they're kind of the same thing. The short description is that the Era Committees look at different eras of baseball history and include players on a ballot who were not inducted into the Hall of Fame through the traditional baseball writers route, but nevertheless are still in the conversation and, according to many, still deserving of enshrinement. In case you haven't picked up on it, these are the exact type of players that I love to discuss on the podcast. I don't really do episodes for guys that are going to get in on the first shot. I didn't do an Ichiro episode. I like to look at the guys that are kind of on the border who have been kind of overlooked. I do think induction into Cooperstown is only for a select few, but I have my own opinions on who those select few should be, and I think over the years a lot of deserving players missed their shot, including many players on this year's Contemporary Era Committee ballot. So without further ado, let's examine the players on this year's Contemporary Era Committee ballot, and I'll discuss their Hall of Fame cases based on my patented three-part criteria of stats, hardware, and the fame factor. The 2025 Contemporary Era ballot includes 8 players: Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Carlos Delgado, Jeff Kent, Don Mattingly, Dale Murphy, Gary Sheffield, and Fernando Valenzuela. Right out of the gate, 2 things about this list stand out for me. 1, on a personal level, these are all stars of the 80s and 90s when I was growing up, and a lot of these guys are the players who got me excited about baseball in the first place, especially Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly. As a young kid in the 80s, these were my 2 favorite players. I had a Don Mattingly poster in my room, and I still have my Don Mattingly baseball cards. I can remember vividly opening a pack of 1989 Topps I got from the concession stand after a Little League game, and I was so excited when I saw a Don Mattingly card on the top. To this day, I still have that card, and it's still my favorite baseball card of all time. Of course, Dale Murphy was my first episode, and his Hall of Fame case is the reason why I started this podcast. He was the subject of my first episode, and I remember going to Braves games as a young kid, cheering on Murph. He was my favorite, and all the kids' favorite players when I was growing up playing T-ball and Little League. So there's tons of history and emotion tied up with these players. With respect to Clemens, Kent, Delgado, Sheffield, on a personal level, these guys I continued to watch and cheer for as I grew into adolescence in the 90s and adulthood in the 2000s. And for a few of them, there was the mixed emotion of the PED stick scandals of the 2000s, which have tarnished their Hall of Fame cases, and which is the reason why the all-time home run king is currently on an Era Committee ballot instead of going in first round on the baseball writers ballot. I'll hold off here. We'll discuss that elephant in the room in a little bit. But for now, the other interesting thing, the second thing about this list I found interesting, is that it contrasts greatly with many of the players I discuss on this podcast. Many of the players we discuss in this podcast got overlooked for the Hall of Fame for one of 2 reasons. Either they had a great long career but lacked that 1 or 2, sort of wow seasons, lacked an MVP or lacked a Cy Young season. My last episode of Kenny Lofton, we talked about that. He kind of lacked that exclamation mark, as I said. Or the flip side is that you have a player where, 1 or 2 of those seasons are great and they stand out. Maybe they won some awards, MVP, Cy Young, but they had a short peak such that their career numbers and counting stats don't quite hit those traditional numbers that the voters, especially Hall of Fame voters in the past, really look at when they're making their selections. In that respect, this list is different. It's stacked with MVP and Cy Young winners, as well as players with just absolutely gaudy career stats, and in some cases, some of the all-time leaders. Included on this list of 8 players I read off are 12 MVP awards, 8 Cy Young awards, and a Rookie of the Year award. So why aren't some of these players in the Hall of Fame? Well, I said I would. Let's rip that Band-Aid off right away, and let's discuss the elephant in the room, starting our ballot discussions with Bonds, Clemens, and Sheffield. Before I begin, I want to just say, in all fairness, I mentioned this on my Gary Sheffield episode. I've done an episode about Gary Sheffield. Again, these players are some of my favorite players growing up, and, my father passed away 5 years ago, and I said this on my Sheffield episode. The 2 players that my dad, who was a lifelong baseball fan, said had the best swings he'd ever seen were Barry Bonds and Gary Sheffield. So for that reason, even though we're discussing the elephant in the room and I have my opinions on PEDs, I still have fond memories of Bonds and Sheffield. And as you're about to hear, I have some fond memories and a story about Roger Clemens too. So let's get right into it. We will discuss the elephant in the room. Let's rip the Band-Aid off. Let's start with Barry Bonds. Oftentimes on this podcast or in the Hall of Fame discussion in general, you'll hear discussions about career stats in the context of other players. For instance, player A only has X amount of hits or home runs, but when compared to these Hall of Fame players, it compares favorably, etc., etc. I do that a lot. I also like to do what many others do, and that's compare total career counting stats to reach conclusions such as, one of only X players with, Y amount of hits, home runs, etc., etc. I don't want to diminish these exercises. If you listen to this podcast, I do them pretty much on every episode, and they're a lot of fun, and they're a great way to illustrate how a player who may have been overlooked is in the pantheon of greats if you look at them with a closer, microscope. And the intention of in those cases, again, is to illustrate that player A has put forth a career worthy of examination and possible induction into the Hall of Fame. In the case of Barry Lamar Bonds, there is no need to resort to stretches of the statistical imagination. Bonds is the all-time MLB leader in the following categories: home runs, walks, intentional walks, B-WAR among position players. Now, I want to note their footnote. I know some of you guys don't like WAR, but this is kind of an interesting footnote about the all-time leader for B-WAR. That's Baseball Reference WAR, or wins above replacement. The all-time leader in overall B-WAR is Babe Ruth with 182.6, if you take into account both Ruth's pitching and his hitting career. Ruth's B-WAR only as a hitter position player is 162.2, which is less than Bonds. Bonds is 162.8. So amongst all players, all positions, all time, Bonds is 4th all time in B-WAR behind combined pitcher-hitter Ruth, Walter Johnson, and Cy Young. But amongst position players, Bonds has the highest Baseball Reference wins above replacement of all time at 162.8. And just in case you didn't know, the home run total, he has 762. That's just a few more than Hank Aaron's 755. The all-time leader in walks at 2,558. And the all-time leader in intentional walks was 688. I mean, these are video game stats. In addition, Barry Bonds holds the following single-season records: offensive WAR with 12.4, home runs 73. So he's the all-time career and single-season home run leader. On-base percentage 609.4. Barry has 3 of the top 10 all-time seasons in on-base percentage, including the top 2 seasons of all time. He has a single-season record in walks with an astronomical 232. Barry has the top 3 highest single-season walk totals of all time and 6 of the top 20 all-time single-season highest walk totals. Barry also has the single-season record for runs created with 230 and 3 of the top 10 seasons all time in runs created. He also has the highest single-season adjusted batting runs and adjusted batting wins, and he has the top 3 seasons all time. He has the highest intentional walks season total with 120. He has the top 3 seasons all time in intentional walks and 9 of the top 21 seasons all time. He also has the highest single season record for wins probability added with 3 of the top 10 seasons all time, situational wins added with the top 3 seasons all time, and RBAT plus with the top 3 seasons all time. These are some of the more advanced analytical stats. To briefly recap his career stats, I know I mentioned some of the leaders before. Let's just take a moment to sort of gasp in awe at the numbers. All the other issues aside, he's got video game career stats. 2,227 runs, 2,935 hits, 601 doubles, 762 home runs, 1,996 RBI, 514 stolen bases, 2,558 walks, a career 298 batting average, 444 on base percentage, 607 slugging percentage for a 1.051 career OPS. He has 5,976 total bases and 688 intentional walks. If these stats aren't enough to cement Barry Bonds' status as one of the all-time greats, regardless of whether or not he's in Cooperstown, then let's look at his hardware. Bonds won 12 Silver Slugger Awards, most all-time. He was a 14-time All-Star, 2-time batting champion, and an 8-time Gold Glove winner. Barry was also awarded the Commissioner's Historic Achievement Award on October 21, 2001 for breaking the single-season home run record as well as the single-season record for slugging percentage and walks. Barry Bonds is the all-time leader in MVPs awarded with a record 7 MVP awards. The second highest total of all time is Shohei Ohtani, who currently clocks in, having just won his 4th MVP. No telling whether or not Shohei breaks this record or not. I'd love to see it. If you listen to this podcast, you know I love Shohei. I'd love to see Shohei win 10 MVPs. I can't get enough of Shohei Ohtani. Don't get me started. Speaking of Ohtani, in 2024, Ohtani, of course, had his famous 50-50 season, which we love to throw into the mix, along with Ronald Acuna's 40-70 season and Jose Canseco's original 40-40 season, which has a bit of a PED asterisk on it, but hey, when I was a kid, I loved that season. If we're looking at career home run and stolen base totals, Bonds has 762 career home runs and 514 stolen bases. He is the only member of the 700-500 club. In fact, of all players all time with 500 or more home runs, only 2 other players have 300 or more steals. That's Willie Mays and Alex Rodriguez. So Bonds is the sole member of the following statistical clubs: the 700-500 club, the 600-500 club, the 500-500 club, and the 500-400 club. Pretty insane. Again, these are video game statistics. There's so much more to explore with regard to Barry's career, his stats, his hardware, but we've got a lot to get to today. So suffice to say, there's no issue that his career statistics, and his hardware place him among the all-time greats. And depending on who you talk to, this is a fun, baseball pub conversation. There's a convincing argument to be made that Barry Bonds is in fact the greatest baseball player of all time. I know it's a tough call, but his name is definitely up there in the mix with Ruth, Cobb, Aaron, Ricky, Musial, Mays, Gehrig, Williams. The list goes on and on. I'm sure I forgot somebody, but he's definitely in that conversation. So the only conversation left is why in the heck is this guy not in the Hall of Fame? And that's where it gets to the elephant in the room. In case you're new to baseball fandom or you've been living in a cave the past 40 years, the answer is obvious and very well known: PEDs, performance-enhancing drugs. Although he has never formally admitted to their use, and a lot of Barry Bonds fans will point out he never failed a drug test. To my knowledge, everything I've read, it's quite clear that he took them. I don't want to get into any legal trouble here. If you don't want to take my word for it, I won't get into the details. We just don't have a lot of time. There's a lot to be said and read on the subject. For starters, I would recommend the book Game of Shadows by Mark Waniwata and Lance Williams. That's just the tip of the iceberg. And for purposes of keeping this concise, I'll just say that's the only issue keeping Barry out of the Hall of Fame, obviously. And I'll reserve my opinions, my soapbox, if you will, on players associated with PEDs until the end of this episode and later times, and kind of discuss them all as a group. And that gets us to the next player on this ballot with the all-time stats, hardware, and the specter of PED use, preventing his induction to Cooperstown. That's Roger Clemens. Clemens' Hall of Fame case is just like Bonds in that he has, an incredible baseball resume, both in terms of statistics and hardware, but he hasn't been voted in the Hall of Fame due to PED allegations. Looking just at the stats, there's no doubt Clemens had one of the best pitching careers of all time. He retired with 354 wins and 184 losses for a 658 win percentage. His 354 wins are 9th best all time and the 3rd best in the modern era behind Greg Maddux and Warren Spahn. He pitched 4,916.2 innings, that's 16th best all time, threw 46 shutouts, the 26th best all time, hit a career ERA of 3.12 or 3.12. His 4,672 strikeouts are third most all-time behind Nolan Ryan and Randy Johnson. He also has a career WAR, a B-WAR, Baseball Reference WAR, of 138.7, eighth best all-time amongst all players, all positions, and third best all-time for pitchers behind Walter Johnson and Cy Young. Just to put that in perspective, I mentioned Barry's WAR earlier. These guys are in astronomical territory. You've heard me say on this podcast before, I usually consider 70 to 75. 75 is, I call it the sweet spot. If you get a WAR of 75 or higher, that's basically Hall of Fame, any issues aside. I mean, this guy, Roger Clemens and Barry Bonds, have almost double that. I mean, just astronomical career stats in terms of both counting stats and the wins above replacement. Clemens is just one of four pitchers in baseball history with 4,000 more strikeouts. The other being the aforementioned Ryan and Johnson, as well as Steve Carlton, who's fourth all-time. All four of these pitchers have 300-plus career wins, which makes for a cool little club. Of those four pitchers, Clemens has the lowest career ERA and the best win-loss percentage and the best ERA+. So certainly one of the best of the best. In terms of advanced stats, Clemens is second all-time behind Cy Young, the man himself for whom the pitching award is named, in both adjusted pitching runs and adjusted pitching wins. He's first all-time in base-out runs saved, base-out wins saved, and situational wins saved, and third best all-time in win probability added. Clemens twice won the pitcher's Triple Crown. In 1997, he did it with 21 wins, 2.05 ERA, and 292 strikeouts for Toronto Blue Jays. And then again in 1998 with 20 wins, a 2.65 ERA, and 271 strikeouts, again for the Blue Jays. His 20 strikeouts in a game on April 29, 1986 against the Seattle Mariners was and still is the Major League record for strikeouts in a game, which has been tied since, perhaps most famously, by Cubs pitcher Kerry Wood in 1998, and then again by Max Scherzer in 2016. But Roger Clemens probably wasn't too worked up about the fact that Max and Kerry tied his record, since he just decided to tie it again himself on September 18, 1996, against the Detroit Tigers. So Roger Clemens, needless to say, is the only pitcher in baseball history with not one but two 20 strikeout games. I'd like to add that to the list of unbreakable records. I know we love to talk about unbreakable records in baseball. It's a fun conversation. So I nominate Clemens' two career 20 strikeout games as an official unbreakable record in baseball history. I just can't see someone throwing 3 20 strikeout games. Maybe I'm wrong, but it might be a long time. I don't think anyone's ever going to pitch 3 20 strikeout games. Now, if black ink is your thing, take note. For those of you who kind of new to this, black ink, if you look on Baseball Reference, black ink denotes that a player led the league in a category. For me, that's a big deal. I'm a big fan of players leading the league in a category. It just indicates that they were, one of the best, if not the best player that particular season or over a particular period of time. Clemens led the league in wins 4 times and had 6 seasons of 20 or more wins. He led the league in WAR, Baseball Reference, wins above replacement, 7 times. He led in win-loss percentage 3 times, ERA 7 times, including 2 seasons with an ERA under 2. And that's like during this, steroid era when guys were jacking home runs. So he led the league in complete games twice and shutouts 6 times. He led the league in strikeouts 5 times and had 12 seasons with 200 or more strikeouts. He also led the league in numerous advanced statistical categories. Won't go down that rabbit hole. Trying to save some time here. Clemens won 2 World Series in 1999 with the Yankees, and he won the decisive Game 4 of that World Series against the Atlanta Braves. He won another in 2000 with the Yankees, in which he won Game 2 against the New York Mets. In terms of hardware, Clemens won 7 Cy Young Awards, most all-time, as well as the 1986 American League MVP Award. He was an 11-time All-Star and named the MVP of the 1986 All-Star Game. Just like Bonds, Clemens was also the recipient of the Commissioner's Historic Achievement Award, given to Roger on July 13, 2004, during the All-Star Game in recognition of Clemens accumulating over 300 wins and 4,000 strikeouts. There's absolutely no doubt that Clemens is one of the greatest pitchers in baseball history. I was a huge fan of Clemens growing up as a kid and even into adulthood. I still have fond memories of going to see Clemens pitch when I was living in Michigan on June 27, 2006 at Comerica Park against the Detroit Tigers. I went with my buddies Rick Sanchez and Joe Michelli. If you're listening, shout out to Rick and Joe. Clemens ultimately took the loss that day, but he pitched very well, allowing only 3 hits and 1 earned run over 6.1 innings. My recollection of the game was that he didn't allow a hit until the 4th or 5th inning. Tried to look this up, but I'm sure there's a way to find this. My recollection is he had a no-hitter going until the 4th or 5th inning, and then he issued some walks, kind of got into trouble in the 6th inning. So, of course, we were excited, if just for a few short innings, at the prospect of watching what we thought at the time was certainly a future first ballot Hall of Famer pitching a no-hitter. So I remember as we left that game, again, shout out to my buddies Rick and Joe, one of us remarked, hey, now we can tell our grandkids we saw Roger Clemens pitch. That's how, again, all this other issues aside, Clemens is a great pitcher. I loved watching him, and it was a great memory I have of watching him pitch in that game. I tell this story, just kind of for fun, but also to emphasize just how good Clemens was, how well-respected he was as a pitcher. And this just makes his absence from Cooperstown and some of the circumstances surrounding his absence all the more sad and tragic. I really won't get into it, but just like Bonds, Clemens has been accused of and associated with steroids and PED use, and that's hurt his career. And it's hurt his, it didn't really hurt his career. It's hurt his chances for getting in the Hall of Fame. I'll reserve my opinions on that for the end, but suffice to say, it's not his stats or his hardware or his fame factor keeping out of the Hall of Fame, but the PED controversy. So that brings us to the third player on the ballot, and the third whose Hall of Fame case has been hampered by PED association, and that's Gary Sheffield. Gary was the subject of my 6th episode, so if you want an in-depth breakdown on his life and career, definitely check out that episode. His career was quite impressive. He retired with 1,636 runs, 2,689 hits, 467 doubles, 509 home runs, 1,676 RBI, 253 stolen bases, a career .292 batting average, .393 on base percentage, .514 slugging, a 9.07 OPS, 4,737 total bases, and 130 intentional walks. These are very impressive career stats, and for a lot of Hall of Fame watchers, the one that pops out is the 509 home runs. There was a time when 500-plus home runs was an automatic ticket to Cooperstown. Not so much in the wake of what I like to call the recent home run extravaganza, aka the steroid era, but we'll get to that in a second. Examining Gary's stats a little deeper, there are 28 players with 500 or more home runs. Of those 28, only 3 have more career stolen bases than Sheffield. It's Bonds, Mays, and A-Rod. There are only 4 players in MLB history with 500 or more home runs and 250 stolen bases. It's just those guys, Sheffield, Bonds, Mays, and A-Rod. It's pretty elite company. Gary also has the least amount of career strikeouts among the 500 home run club members. I thought that was fascinating. Least strikeouts. In terms of analytics, Gary's career B-WAR was 60.5, which is good, better than others on the ballot, but it's his career counting stats that really stand out and may ultimately get him into Cooperstown. In terms of hardware, Gary was a 9-time All-Star, 5-time Silver Slugger, and he never won an MVP award, but he did get MVP votes in 7 seasons, with 6 top 10 finishes, including 3 seasons in which he finished in the top 3. That's 92, 2003, and 2004. The closest he came to winning an MVP is 2004, when he finished second to Vladimir Guerrero in the American League MVP award. I've said it before, and I'll say it again. To me, I think a career in which a player consistently receives MVP votes over a sustained period of time makes for a better Hall of Fame resume than someone that had, just one outlier season, won an MVP, and then, never really received any MVP votes again. Gary also won the National League batting title in 1992. For those of you who still value such things, I do. I'm still a bit old school, and I do embrace, the analytics, but I like batting averages. Batting titles are still important to me. I think it's a great part of baseball tradition and history to celebrate each season's batting champ. Even through the analytics age, we still celebrate the batting champ. So I, for one, will still continue to do so. I think it's important. Speaking of batting average, Gary was a part of the 1997 Florida Marlins team that won the World Series and played well that postseason. He had a .556 batting average in the NLDS against the Giants, had 4 hits, an RBI, and a home run in the NLCS against the Braves, and then 7 hits, including a home run, and 5 RBI in the 1997 World Series. So it's fair to say Gary was not just a member of that 1997 Florida Marlins World Series championship team, but he was a huge part of their success that year. In terms of fame factor, Gary had a reputation as a feared slugger. I used to love watching games with my dad. When Gary Sheffield was playing, he would always say, "This guy's dangerous. He's dangerous. You better watch out for this guy. He'll hit a home run." Anyway, it was a lot of fun. Fond memories of watching those games with my dad. If your team was playing Gary Sheffield and Gary came up to bat, you were immediately afraid, especially if you didn't have your best pitcher in the mound. Gary's trademark bat wave was imitated by countless kids all over the world, including this podcast host, at one point or another. He mixed an excellent combination of speed, hitting for power and average, and a low strikeout rate to excellent effect, wreaking havoc on MLB pitchers for decades. In terms of the Hall of Fame debate, I believe that based on his stats, hardware, postseason performance, and fame factor alone, Gary Sheffield is definitely a Hall of Famer. I've had this conversation with some folks. A lot of people don't think he should get in based on these factors. I disagree. The only reason that he's not in the Hall of Fame, I think, is because of PEDs. Without getting into it, the short story is that he used the famous cream supplied by Balco's Greg Anderson, although Sheffield claims he didn't know it was steroids. We don't have a lot of time here. And again, to recap my thoughts on PED-associated players, I'm going to talk about that at the end. Short version for now is any PEDs used association gives me pause. So I've said it before, I'll say it again. I wouldn't vote for Gary, but if there's one player ultimately that I think I would vote for who's been associated with PEDs, it probably would be Gary, because from what I've read of the story, that's a whole story for another time and place. He took it kind of once or twice. He was having some knee issues and said it didn't help. I don't think his career was really aided and abetted by PED use. It sounds like it was kind of a one-time thing, but nevertheless, he has said what he said. There's some admissions. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence. So just in terms of the overall, specter of PEDs, it would give me pause, just like it would give me pause to vote for Bonds and Clemens, as well as, well, they're not on the ballot, but Palmeiro, McGuire, stuff like that. We can talk about that later. I don't want to get off on a huge soapbox on PEDs. Let's move on to Carlos Delgado. Blue Jays legend Carlos Delgado was only on the Baseball Writers Association of America ballot 1 year, 2015, and he got just 3.8% of the vote and was off the ballot. A very surprising one and done considering the impressive career he had. Carlos played 17 years in Major League Baseball, including 12 with the Toronto Blue Jays before spending a season with the Florida Marlins, and then his last 4 seasons with the New York Mets. Although he's mostly associated with the Blue Jays, he's also well loved and remembered by Mets fans, so he has the support of these two huge fan bases. For his career, Delgado retired with a 44.4, it's a tongue twister there, a 44.4 B-WAR, that rhymes, and it tongue twists. 44.4 B-WAR, 1,241 runs, 2,038 hits, 483 doubles, 473 home runs, 1,512 RBI, a career .280 batting average, .383 on-base percentage, .546 slugging, 9.29 OPS, 3,976 total bases. Most notably there, Delgado fell just 27 home runs short of the famed 500 home run club. But in recent years, I think voters haven't placed as much emphasis on these sort of checklist statistics, which might fare well for Delgado, if not on this ballot, maybe on a future ballot. Of note, Fred McGriff recently got into the Hall of Fame finally after years, after he retired with just 7 home runs short of 500. So almost getting there. I think a lot of voters are kind of okay with that now, whereas it used to be, well, you got to make this club or otherwise you're not in. So while Delgado didn't set any career statistic records and none of his numbers hit any traditional Hall of Fame benchmarks, again, he's just a few home runs short of 500 and didn't get 3,000 hits. Nevertheless, his career stats demonstrate a very well-rounded career. And again, here I am doing it. I said in the Bonds section that we don't need to do it for him, but Delgado is one of just 35 players in Major League Baseball to retire with 2,000 hits, 450 home runs, and 1,500 RBI. Now, if you look at the list of those 35 players, it's a who's who of the greatest Major League players of all time, all of whom are Hall of Famers with the exception of Albert Pujols and Miguel Cabrera, who aren't yet eligible, and the following players who've been associated with PEDs. His ballot mates, Barry Bonds and Gary Sheffield, along with A-Rod, Sosa, Palmeiro, and Manny Ramirez. So that's pretty impressive company. Even more impressive when you consider that amongst those 35 players who all have 2,000 or more hits, 450 or more home runs, and 1,500 or more RBI, Delgado has the 15th highest slugging percentage, the 16th highest on-base percentage, and the 16th highest OPS. Very impressive. He also has the 3rd highest hit by pitch total, which is pretty fascinating. For the most part, I don't really factor hit by pitch numbers into my Hall of Fame analysis, but they are interesting to mention. It gives you a little context and history of the player. For a deep dive into, if you're a fan of the podcast, you know where I'm going. For a deep dive into career hit by pitch numbers, check out my Chase Utley podcast. Utley is 9th all-time in career hit by pitches, and in my Chase Utley episode, I go down the fascinating rabbit hole of the all-time career hit by pitch leader, Huey Jennings. Definitely one of the more interesting episodes I've done. I always get a lot of fun comments on my Twitter X account for the Chase Utley Huey Jennings episode. So if you haven't listened to that one, check it out. It's pretty interesting. Looking at Delgado's individual season stats, he led the American League in doubles once with 57 in 2000. That's the third highest single season total in the modern era, behind Freddie Freeman and Hall of Famer Todd Helton's 59 and Nick Castellanos' 58. That same year, Delgado led the American League in total bases with 378 and hit by pitches, there you go, with 15. Delgado led all of Major League Baseball in RBIs with 145 in 2003 and led the American League with a 1.019 OPS and 161 OPS plus. He also led the National League in sac flies in 2006 and twice played all 162 games in a season, tying for the league lead those years. Overall, Delgado had a very impressive career, almost quietly under the radar impressive, considering that he played during the recent home run extravaganza, and as a result, some of his offensive numbers, they don't really stand out, but he did have 3 seasons of 40 or more home runs. He had 11 seasons of 30 or more home runs, and 13 seasons with 20 or more home runs to go along with 9 seasons of over 100 RBI. That's excellent stats. Delgado was a consistent and steady slugger, albeit one who flew under the radar of gaudier PED-induced stats of the era. As a result, he was only selected to 2 All-Star teams, and he never won an MVP award, although he received MVP votes in 7 seasons, finishing a very close second place in 2003 to Alex Rodriguez. Delgado did win the American League's Hank Aaron Award in 2000, recognizing him as the league's best hitter, and he won the prestigious Roberto Clemente Award in 2006. Delgado won 3 Silver Sluggers as a first baseman and was also a very good fielder, leading the league in putouts, double plays, and range factor numerous times, although he also led the league in errors several times. Delgado never won or even made it to a World Series, but in his one postseason with the Mets in 2006, he batted .429 with a home run in an NLDS win over the Dodgers, and batted .304 with 3 home runs and 9 RBI in a loss to the Cardinals. Delgado certainly made a splash that 2006 postseason, and there's no telling what his career would have looked like had he been part of more playoff teams. Delgado is a member of the Toronto Blue Jays Level of Excellence, which is basically their team's Hall of Fame, and he's a member of the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. Delgado holds numerous career records with the Toronto Blue Jays, and he holds the Major League record for home runs by a Puerto Rican player. The numerous Blue Jay records and his long tenure with the team may well be his strongest Hall of Fame card. As I've mentioned before, the official criteria of the Baseball Writers Association of America is that, quote, voting shall be based upon the player's record, playing ability, integrity, sportsmanship, character, and contributions to the team on which the player played. I've mentioned this sentence before in the context of David Wright, whose career was cut short by injuries, but nonetheless he holds a lot of Mets team records. In Delgado's case, it's impossible to ignore his contributions to the Blue Jays, a storied franchise who just barely lost the World Series this year to the Dodgers and who once won back-to-back World Series in 1992 and 1993. Overall, Carlos Delgado was a very good player for an extended period of time, a well-respected journeyman slugger who was dependable and delivered in his one postseason. His inclusion amongst those 35 all-time greats fares well for him, and if he gets in the Hall of Fame someday, I wouldn't be upset, but right now for me on this ballot, I don't think he has the stats, hardware, or fame factor as the other players on this ballot. In terms of his career, I feel similarly about Delgado as I do about Kenny Lofton, whose Hall of Fame case I discussed in my last episode, in that Delgado's career, to me, lacks that exclamation point, that elevator pitch wow factor, or whatever you want to call it. And in terms of this ballot, I just think there are other players that have more of that than Carlos Delgado. Next up on our list is Jeff Kent. Jeff is a name that frequently pops up in these should be in the Hall of Fame conversations, and he has a loyal fan base that's getting more and more vocal about his absence from Cooperstown. The elevator pitch for Jeff Kent is that he's the all-time career home run leader amongst second basemen. But is this enough to get him in the Hall of Fame? Jeff played 17 years in Major League Baseball, but he's best remembered for the 6 seasons he spent with the San Francisco Giants between 1997 and 2002. During that period, he made 3 All-Star teams, won 3 Silver Sluggers, and received MVP votes in 5 seasons and won the National League MVP award in 2000. Overall for his career, Kent retired with a career 55.4 B-WAR to go along with 1,320 runs, 2,461 hits, 560 doubles, 377 home runs, 1,518 RBI, a career .290 batting average, .356 on base percentage, .500 slugging percentage, .855 OPS, and 4,246 total bases. Jeff led the league in sac flies twice in his career, the only offensive statistics in which he ever led the league. In the field, Jeff Kent led the league in attempts in 2001 and double plays in 2002, but he also led the league in errors 3 times, including a major league high 20 in 1998 for second baseman. At the second base position, Jeff Kent ranks 13th all-time in games played, 20th all-time in putouts, and 14th in double plays turned. In terms of hardware, Jeff won the 2000 National League MVP award and received MVP votes in 7 seasons, including 4 top 10 finishes. Jeff was a 5-time All-Star and 4-time Silver Slugger and made the postseason in 7 seasons for a career postseason batting average of .276. He played well in the postseason, and that career average is lowered substantially by a poor outing in the 2008 postseason when Kent was 40 years old. But at his prime, Kent played very well in the postseason, including his MVP year of 2000 when he batted .375 in a 4-game NLDS loss to the Mets. And in his only World Series appearance in 2002, he batted .276 with 3 home runs and 7 RBI in an eventual loss to the Angels. Jeff Kent was well renowned for being a strong hitting and good fielding second baseman, but we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the irony of him and Barry Bonds being on the same ballot. As for many, Jeff Kent's career was also best remembered for the well-publicized animosity between him and Barry Bonds, which included, at one point, an actual fight in the dugout. You can go on YouTube and find the video. In some respects, this animosity overshadowed Kent's career, just as some of Bonds' off-field issues overshadowed his career. And without delving too deep into it, there are many mixed opinions about Kent off the field that have, for better or for worse, impacted his Hall of Fame case. For me, Kent was a very good player, and while revoting awards is always a slippery slope, that 2000 MVP award to me was, with all due respect to Jeff Kent, who had a great year, always a bit of a head-scratcher. His teammate Barry Bonds finished second, and many people think Bonds should have won the MVP award, but look, Barry's got 7, he's all right. There's just a lot of drama involving that 1-2 finish, with the writers at the time beginning to suspect Barry Bonds was using, and some seeing that Jeff Kent was more, clutch than Barry Bonds. I just didn't like that overall vibe of 2 teammates fighting each other, finishing 1-2 with the journalists sort of pitting them against each other. Always sort of rubbed me the wrong way, especially when one of them was associated with PED use. And for all those reasons, there's just a lot of drama and a bad vibe to me to Jeff Kent's 2000 MVP award. For me, again, while revoting MVP awards is, of course, a slippery slope, I mentioned this on my episode about Todd Helton. To me, if I were revoting, the clear winner of the 2000 National League MVP award should have been Todd Helton, the subject of my 3rd episode, who in 2000 led the National League in WAR, hits, RBI, batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. He just had an absolutely monster year. So again, with the caveat that revoting awards is a slippery slope, and we have to acknowledge the winners every year, whether we agree or not, between all the drama on the Giants with Kent and Bonds, and the clearly more dominant season of Todd Helton that year, which many voters wrote off due to the perceived Coors effect, which is another pet peeve of mine. I won't get off on the soapbox. I think that's kind of blown out of proportion. Again, that 2000 National League MVP award just never really sat right with me. So for me, personally, it's not a selling point on Kent's Hall of Fame case, especially when there are other one-time MVPs who aren't in the Hall of Fame, and several two-time MVPs who aren't in the Hall of Fame, including one we're going to be discussing in a little bit here. As for the status of the career record holder for home runs at second base, it makes for a nice elevator pitch and a great factoid to list on a Hall of Fame plaque, and that in and of itself will probably get Kent into Cooperstown one day. Will he get in on this ballot? Well, he's got a lot of competition, just like I said with Delgado. Kent's got a lot of competition in this ballot, including his former teammate Barry Bonds, as well as Sheffield and Clemens. All these guys have vastly better Hall of Fame resumes, but are tainted by PED allegations. Kent also has stiff competition on this ballot from not just Carlos Delgado, but the last three players on our list, all of whom could be considered the very face of Major League Baseball in the 1980s. The first of these three faces of 1980s baseball is pitcher Fernando Valenzuela. In the case of Fernando, I'm going to start off with the fame factor. There's very few players for whom I think the fame factor is their biggest selling point. I've mentioned before Tommy John and Roger Maris as two players that the fame factor is undeniable. You cannot tell the story of baseball without those two players. In the case of Fernando, and also with Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly, as we're going to get into in a second, the fame factor really is a huge part of their case. Again, I've already labeled them here unofficially faces of 1980s baseball. But in the case of Fernando Valenzuela, it was something completely different altogether. If you're unfamiliar with the story of Fernando Valenzuela, I'll give you sort of a short version, but I'll say that you should definitely check out two documentaries to give you the full picture of Fernando Valenzuela. The first is the ESPN 30 for 30 film Fernando Nation, and the other is the documentary Fernando Mania at 40. Both of these documentaries tell the full story of Fernando Valenzuela far better than I will be able to on this episode, and in further detail than I can recall, as Fernando's heyday was admittedly a little bit before my time. If you know about Fernando Mania, you know. If you don't, here's the extremely short version of Fernando Mania. Dodger Stadium in LA is beautiful. I've been there several times. Beautiful, great place to catch a game. It's historic, but it's not without some controversy in its backstory. The site, still known today as Chavez Ravine, used to be a residential community largely inhabited by Mexican Americans, and for approximately 10 years between 1951 and 1961, the Dodgers and the city of Los Angeles used eminent domain and other means to remove residents in order to build the stadium. It's a controversial part of history. Many residents opposed these measures, and as a result, of course, there's a lot of controversy, legal issues, protests, and conflict before the last residents were ultimately removed and the stadium built. As a result, and as these documentaries tell in far greater detail than I can here, there was a strained relationship between the Los Angeles Dodgers and the Mexican-American community in Los Angeles for years. And it was into this dynamic that Fernando Valenzuela, a screwball-throwing pitcher from Echihuahilo, Mexico, was thrust in when he joined the Los Angeles Dodgers in 1980. He pitched in only 10 games that year in a relief role, but finished with a 2-0 record, 1 save, and a 0.0 ERA, allowing no earned runs in 17.2 innings pitched. But all of this was a precursor to the 1981 season, in which the legend of Fernando Valenzuela was forever emblazoned upon the world. I could dedicate an entire episode to that 1981 season. And in fact, I gave you the name of two documentaries that pretty much deal exclusively in the 1981 season and Fernando Mania. Valenzuela started for the Dodgers on opening day, the first time in history a rookie had started for the Dodgers on opening day, and he met the moment by pitching a complete game shutout against the Houston Astros. By May 14th of the season, Fernando was 8-0 with 7 complete games and 5 shutouts. And this is where Fernando Mania was born. Word was spreading about his pitching prowess, and crowds lined up to pack Dodger Stadium. Beyond the field and the statistics, Fernando also brought the Mexican-American community out to the ballpark, and through his performance helped heal some of the wounds of the past. And again, the documentaries I mentioned go into this aspect of the story in much greater detail, with much greater accuracy than I ever could, so definitely check those out. Back on the field, Fernando's finished that strike-shortened 1981 season by leading the National League with 25 games started, 11 complete games, 8 shutouts, 192.1 innings pitched, and 180 strikeouts to go along with a 13-7 record and a 2.48 ERA. Now, the 13 wins don't sound that impressive, but again, this was a strike-shortened season, and the National League leader in wins that year was Hall of Famer Tom Seaver with 14. Fernando mania continued into the 1981 postseason, where he picked up 3 wins, including a complete game victory in Game 3 of the World Series against the New York Yankees. Fernando would finish the 1981 season as an All-Star, Silver Slugger, and both the National League Rookie of the Year and Cy Young Award winner, and finished 5th in the National League MVP voting to go along with being a member of the World Series winning Los Angeles Dodgers. Obviously, this was one of the greatest, if not the greatest, rookie season for a pitcher in Major League Baseball history, and definitely modern in Major League Baseball history. An auspicious beginning that was the first of 7 consecutive seasons that constituted the prime of Fernando's career. During that span between 1981 and 1987, Fernando was a 6-time All-Star. He won 2 Silver Sluggers and a Gold Glove. He led the league in complete games 3 times and led the National League with 21 wins in 1986. He also led the league in batters faced 3 times, and many believe it was this combination of a heavy workload combined with the mechanics of the screwball, which requires significant bending of the elbow, that resulted in Fernando's relatively short peak and early decline starting in 1988 when he was only 27 years old. Fernando was placed on the disabled list and as a result was not able to participate in the 1988 postseason, which saw the Dodgers beat the mighty A's in dramatic fashion, including that famous Kirk Gibson walk-off home run in Game 1. Although his glory days were behind him, due in large part to arm injuries, Fernando still had flashes of the old brilliance, most notably on June 29, 1990, when he pitched a no-hitter against the St. Louis Cardinals at Dodger Stadium. There's a video on MLB's YouTube page of the last out of this game, and you gotta watch it. The great Vin Scully is behind the mic and makes the call, so definitely check that out. R.I.P. Vin Scully and R.I.P. Fernando Valenzuela. That no-hitter marked the symbolic conclusion of his 11-year Dodger career, as he would be released the following spring, and he pitched in only 2 games that 1991 season with the California Angels before spending the 1992 season pitching in Mexico. He would return to Major League Baseball in 1993, however, with the Baltimore Orioles, and retired after the 1997 season following more stints with the Phillies, Padres, and Cardinals. He was able to put together one more solid season in 1996, in which he went 13-8 with a 3.62 ERA and 95 strikeouts. So, as I've mentioned, I started off this conversation about Fernando with the fame factor, which for many players is kind of an afterthought, but in Fernando's case, it's his biggest argument for entrance into Cooperstown. Fernando mania was a cultural phenomenon bigger than the game itself, something akin to Beatlemania. Although they were both before my time, perhaps the only thing that has ever come close in baseball was Mark Fidrick's 1976 season with the Detroit Tigers, in which the pitcher won 19 games, pitched 24 complete games, and won the American League Rookie of the Year, and became the first and only Major League Baseball player to grace the cover of Rolling Stone magazine. As an interesting aside, my mother-in-law, who's not a sports fan, was talking to me recently about this podcast, and when I mentioned baseball, she's from Detroit, and one of the only players she remembered, she said, "Do you remember the Bird?" And that's almost 50 years ago, so that just goes to show you. Not to get off on a rabbit hole about the Bird, I mentioned him just to liken that popularity to that of Fernando. I think this is like, again, these were 2 things that were before my time, but really just 2 of the only times in baseball that a player took off and it became something that's bigger than the game. And in the case of Fernando, especially if you lived in Los Angeles, you were a Dodgers fan, or especially amongst the Mexican-American and Latino communities in California, Fernando mania was huge. In the documentaries I mentioned, there was a story about Catholic nuns watching Fernando pitch while praying the rosary. And it's just one of the thousands of stories about Fernando mania and that 1981 season. It's just amazing that one player could just transcend the sport and literally became a worldwide phenomenon. The only thing I think we've seen that might be somewhat close at this point is maybe right now with Shohei Ohtani. He's a worldwide megastar, 2-way player, unicorn, whatever you want to call him. Every time you think you've seen him do everything he can, he does something else that's different and amazing, sets records. Can't even keep track of the records he set. But everything that Fernando did at the time was unprecedented. It was huge. Again, it was like Beatlemania. Without a doubt, the fame factor alone would bring Fernando into the Hall of Fame. He would absolutely be a revered and popular addition to the Hall of Fame and would surely draw crowds from all over the world wanting to see his plaque and pay their respects to the humble hero from Etchowaquila, who sadly passed away from cancer in late 2024. Now, if you're hearing this story of Fernando Valenzuela and asking yourself, why isn't he in the Hall of Fame? Well, I think the answer is that his career stats candidly don't stack up to a lot of the all-time greats. As we mentioned, he had a 7-year peak and started having arm problems in his late 20s, likely due to a combination of a heavy workload and the mechanics of throwing a screwball. As a result, while Fernando had that exclamation mark season in 1981, something I noted was lacking in the Hall of Fame cases of players such as Carlos Delgado and even Kenny Lofton, my last episode, Fernando's career numbers fell short in the eyes of a lot of voters. He finished his 17-year career with a 41.4 B-WAR, a 173 win and 153 loss record. That's a .531 win percentage, a 3.54 ERA, 2,074 strikeouts. He faced 12,398 batters in 2,930 innings. He threw 113 complete games and pitched 31 shutouts. It's worth noting, as a pitcher, his B-WAR was 37.3, but overall as a player, it was 41.4, due in part to his bat. I mentioned earlier his 2 Silver Sluggers. Fernando was a very good hitting pitcher. In 1,044 plate appearances, he had a 200 batting average, right at that Mendoza line. He had 187 hits for his career, including 26 doubles, 10 home runs, and 84 RBI. Obviously, he's not going to get in the Hall of Fame on these batting stats, but I think they're worth noting as it shows what a well-rounded player Fernando was. In an era where pitchers had to hit, Fernando took that job seriously and was one of the better hitting pitchers of the era. Looking at those pitching stats, however, he does fall way short of the magic 300 win and 3,000 strikeout clubs, but that's not to say his career pitching stats aren't worth exploring. He had a very good career, and as I like to do, that begs the question, does he fall into any categories of pitchers who have hit certain milestones? What stands out for me is the 113 complete games and 31 shutouts. Statistics that read like relics of a bygone era. By today's standards, those are video game numbers, but in Fernando's day and in earlier generations, it was common for pitchers, especially star pitchers, to have a lot of complete games and shutouts. Indeed, Fernando is one of 121 pitchers in baseball history to have 100 or more complete games and 30 or more shutouts. Of those pitchers, only 41 have 2,000 or more career strikeouts. And of those 41 pitchers, there are only 11 pitchers not in the Hall of Fame. 2 of those 11 pitchers are on this ballot, Fernando Valenzuela and Roger Clemens. 2 more pitchers on that list, Tommy John and Louis Tiant, have previous podcast episodes dedicated to them. The only remaining pitchers on this list are some still very good ones, albeit some which arguably do not have a strong Hall of Fame case, and those pitchers are Denny Martinez, Frank Tanana, Jerry Koosman, Mickey Lolich, Bobo Newsom, Vida Blue, and Camilo Pascual. Again, these pitchers who are a part of this 41-pitcher club of 100 or more complete games, 30 or more shutouts, and 2,000 or more strikeouts are very good, but probably not Hall of Fame pitchers, with the exception of maybe Vida Blue and Denny Martinez. So while Fernando certainly had a great career and some of his impressive milestones, I think in the eyes of a lot of voters, given that there are numerous pitchers among the 41 who have 100 more complete games, 30 more shutouts, and 2,000 strikeouts that aren't in the Hall of Fame, and probably won't be, this statistical grouping certainly doesn't hurt his Hall of Fame chances, but I don't think they help him get into Cooperstown. Now, just for fun, here are 2 fun statistical categories Fernando falls into that are perhaps more elite. Fernando is one of only 4 pitchers with 2,000 or more career strikeouts, and 2 or more Silver Sluggers. The others are Hall of Famer Tom Glavine, Zach Greinke, who's probably going to be in the Hall of Fame, and Madison Bumgarner. He may not get in, but has a good case. He was definitely a good pitcher. The other stat I posted on my Twitter X account, I have to say this because I want to throw some respect to Fernando. In their 38 combined years of pitching in Major League Baseball, future Hall of Famers Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer have tossed 38 complete games. Fernando Valenzuela had 38 complete games before his 23rd birthday. Again, different era, but Fernando, man, he went the distance. He pitched complete games. He got shutouts. Finally, with regard to his hardware, as we mentioned, Fernando Valenzuela had that amazing Fernando Mania 1981 year. He won the Rookie of the Year and the Cy Young Award. He was also a 6-time All-Star, 2-time Silver Slugger, and a Gold Glove winner. All of these are impressive, but to be fair, there are other pitchers out there with Cy Young Awards or more than one Cy Young Award and more All-Star appearances who are not in the Hall of Fame and may never make the Hall of Fame. So I don't think Fernando gets in on his hardware alone. But when you look at the totality of Fernando Valenzuela's career, his respectable career statistics, his awards, and especially the Fernando Mania of that magical 1981 season, it all paints a very compelling portrait of a player without whom the story of baseball cannot be told. Especially the story of baseball in Southern California, the story of the Los Angeles Dodgers, the story of baseball amongst the Mexican-American community, and the story of baseball in the 1980s. Speaking of the story of baseball in the 1980s, the second of 3 faces of baseball in 1980s baseball is Don Mattingly. Donnie Baseball, as we called him, was one of the faces of the game in the 1980s, both on the field as a player and captain of the hallowed New York Yankees, and also off the field as one of the favorite baseball cards in an era of exploding growth in the baseball card or hobby community, as it's known. If you were alive at the time, you remember, or maybe you know from reading about it now, but you can't mention Don Mattingly without mentioning his impact on the baseball card collecting community, especially his 1984 rookie cards. Both his tops and especially his 1984 Donruss rookie card, which still today at a 10 PSA rating can fetch thousands of dollars at auction, and which Sports Illustrated said was the number 2 most iconic baseball card from the 1980s, behind, of course, the 1989 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr. So again, we're starting a bit with the fame factor, and I'll just wrap that aspect up by adding that being the face of the game for a decade is a big deal. And also, the Yankee captain mantle is not one to be borne lightly. There have only been 16 captains in New York Yankees history, of which 6 are in the Hall of Fame, and a 7th, Aaron Judge, will almost certainly be in the Hall of Fame one day. Another former Yankee captain, Thurman Munson, is, in my opinion, deserving of the Hall of Fame, and I'll discuss his case on another episode. For now, we'll conclude Mattingly's fame factor by stating that he was one of the most popular players of the 80s, a player for which numerous baseball fans, including this podcast host, collected his baseball cards and had posters on their walls, and there's no doubt that he was one of the most popular players of the 80s and the face of the game. But do his stats and hardware back up that popularity, and does he deserve enshrinement into Cooperstown based on the stats and the hardware? The issue with Don Mattingly is the same as with Fernando, and also somewhat the same as we'll see with Dale Murphy. And that's despite a very productive career peak, Don Mattingly started experiencing injuries at a young age. In Donnie's case, back problems in the early 90s, which cut his career short, and as a result, he didn't hit the career counting stats milestones that voters, especially voters in previous generations, valued when it came time to vote for Hall of Famers. So without these counting stats, Don Mattingly's Hall of Fame case will be determined by his averages, his percentage stats, if you will, along with his hardware, and most notably the fame factor. Don Mattingly, again, because of the back problems, he only played 14 seasons in Major League Baseball, and he retired with a 42.4 WAR to go along with 1,007 runs, 2,153 hits, 442 doubles, 222 home runs, 1,099 RBI, 3,301 total bases, 96 sac flies, 136 intentional walks. Remarkably, Mattingly struck out only 444 times in 7,722 plate appearances. He never struck out more than 43 times in a season. As a result of this plate discipline, he retired with a .307 batting average. Mattingly also had a .358 on base percentage, a .471 slugging percentage, and a career .830 OPS. Mattingly batted .300 or better in 7 seasons, including a career-high .352 in 1986, just .005 points lower than AL batting champion Wade Boggs, who hit .357. But in 1984, Mattingly narrowly beat out his teammate, Hall of Famer Dave Winfield, to bat .343 and win his first and only batting title. During his career, Mattingly led the American League in hits twice, including a Major League high 238 in 1986. He led all of Major League Baseball in doubles 3 consecutive seasons from 1984 through 1986, and led all of MLB with 145 RBI in 1985. He led all of MLB in total bases twice, including 1986, in which he also led all of MLB in slugging percentage, OPS, and OPS+. During Mattingly's peak years of 1984 through 1989, he was voted to 6 consecutive All-Star teams, won 5 consecutive Gold Gloves at first base, and received MVP votes in 5 seasons, including 3 top 10 finishes, capped off by winning the 1985 American League MVP award. Although, again, revoting MVP awards is a slippery slope, it's worth noting that Mattingly finished second in MVP voting in 1986 to his ballot mate Roger Clemens, a pitcher, so amongst position players, Mattingly was the highest MVP vote winner that season. And if I can briefly soapbox, I'm just not a fan of pitchers winning the MVP. They have their own award. So, again, it's a slippery slope and a soapbox issue for me, but the point is that Don Mattingly was very close to winning back-to-back MVPs in 1985 and 1986. Mattingly started experiencing back problems in 1990, which limited him to only 102 games. And while he never returned to the elite level of his peak, he continued to play well between 1991 and 1994, receiving MVP votes in 2 of those seasons and winning 4 more consecutive Gold Gloves before back problems forced him to retire after the 1995 season, but not before Mattingly was able to play in his first and only postseason. And at the age of 34, Donnie Baseball emptied the tank, batting .417 with a home run and 6 RBI in an ALDS series loss to the Seattle Mariners. If you had asked any baseball fan during Don Mattingly's career if he was a future Hall of Famer, 100% of them would have said yes. It still comes as a bit of a shock and surprise to baseball fans of that era that Don Mattingly's not in the Hall of Fame. But again, the reality is that his career was cut short and he didn't hit any major milestone statistics. I'd previously done an episode on Dick Allen, who was finally inducted into Cooperstown this past summer, and I think Allen is a good comparison player for Mattingly, as Allen only played 15 years compared to Mattingly's 14, and also won an MVP award. If you compare their stats straight up, however, Allen had a considerably higher career WAR, 58.8 compared to Mattingly's 42.4, and has more career home runs, stolen bases, and a higher career on-base percentage, slugging, OPS, and OPS+. To some, especially those who already saw Allen as a borderline Hall of Fame candidate, this doesn't bode well for Don Mattingly's Hall of Fame case. But the Hall of Fame is more than just a head-to-head comparison amongst players. Let's explore Mattingly's career percentage stats to see if we can rank him amongst the all-time greats. Mattingly is one of 102 players with 2,000 or more career hits and a career batting average of 300 or higher, which is impressive but doesn't place him amongst the inner circle. Likewise, if we limit this list to players with a career 800 or higher OPS, Mattingly is one of 80 players. If we limit this list by players with 200 or more home runs, however, we get only 40 players, of whom many are Hall of Famers, but not all of them are. As such, if we want to get Mattingly on a list of all-timers, we're going to have to stretch it a little bit. If we look at players with a career batting average of 305 or higher, 200 or more home runs, and 2,000 or more hits, it's only 29 players, of whom the only players not in the Hall of Fame are Don Mattingly, Manny Ramirez, and Maglio Ordonez. Manny's not in the Hall of Fame due to PEDs, and Maglio was a great player, but probably not a Hall of Famer. Still, this is an impressive list, but before you start enshrining Don Mattingly, note first, admittedly, I had to tweak the numbers a bit to get Don on a short list of all-time greats. And amongst this list, Mattingly has the lowest amount of career runs, stolen bases, total bases, and on-base percentage. The second to lowest amount of career RBI, Hall of Famer Kirby Puckett has the least, and the third lowest slugging percentage in OPS. So Mattingly is just barely in this club that we had to tweak the numbers a bit to get him into. So despite Don Mattingly's very good career and his good batting average, I think Mattingly just falls way too short on career counting stats, and even his batting average and on-base percentage to merit induction into Cooperstown. But these aren't the only qualifications. I mentioned Kirby Puckett, and perhaps that's a better comparison player for Mattingly, as they both played in the same era, the 80s and 90s, and like Mattingly, Puckett's career was cut short due to injuries. In Puckett's case, he played only 12 seasons and had to retire due to glaucoma. But again, this comparison doesn't really help Mattingly, as in 2 less seasons, Puckett still has a career higher BWAR, more hits, and a higher batting average, on-base percentage, slugging percentage, and OPS. In 2 less seasons, Puckett also has 10 All-Star selections to Mattingly's 6, and won 6 Silver Sluggers compared to Mattingly's 3. And all this is not to mention, as much as it pains me to mention this, that Kirby Puckett was one of the heroes in the 1991 World Series, hitting a walk-off home run in Game 6 to beat the Braves and force a Game 7. Despite Mattingly's short career, he was a 6-time All-Star, 9-time Gold Glove winner, 3-time Silver Slugger, won a batting title, and was the 1985 American League MVP. The New York Yankees have since retired his number 23, which hangs in Monument Park. This may upset some folks, but I think Mattingly's Hall of Fame case falls a bit short in terms of statistics and hardware. And I compared him here to 2 other players who had similarly short careers, and their stats, frankly, are much better. Don Mattingly is also the holder of 2 unique home run records, which were both set in the 1987 season. Don hit 6 grand slams in 1987, a record that has since been tied by Travis Hafner in 2006. In an interesting twist, Don's record 6 grand slams that 1987 season were the only grand slams Don Mattingly would hit in his entire career. It's baseball for you. In 1987, Mattingly also tied a record previously set by Dale Long in 1956 by hitting a home run in 8 consecutive games. The mark has since been tied by Hall of Famer Ken Griffey Jr. After his playing career, Mattingly had a 12-year managerial career with the Los Angeles Dodgers and Miami Marlins, where he compiled a 446 and 363 record and won the 2020 National League Manager of the Year award. I mentioned both his 8 consecutive home run game record and his managerial career because there is, in my opinion, a dark confluence of these 2 aspects of Don Mattingly's career that, and this may upset some folks, don't help his reputation or his Hall of Fame case. I'll start by saying this. Mattingly has had a very good career as a coach and a manager, but in my opinion, he tarnished his career a bit the way he handled pitching to Ronald Acuna while he was the manager of the Marlins. If you're a Braves fan, you know where I'm going with this, and you remember there were numerous times that Marlins pitchers threw at Acuna, and I'm sorry, there's no way Mattingly didn't know or didn't order those, and if you don't have to take my opinion for it. To briefly recap the dramatics of 2018, Ronald Acuna was having an outstanding rookie season for the Atlanta Braves. He would eventually hit 26 home runs and win the National League Rookie of the Year award. And more than that, he was an exciting player who was giving Braves fans some hopes for the future after a few years of abysmal post-rebuild baseball. In August of 2018, Ronald Acuna captured Braves fans' hearts and imaginations by hitting a home run in 5 consecutive games. It was during this period that the Marlins came into Atlanta on August 15, 2018, and with the first pitch of the game, Marlins pitcher Jose Urena drilled Acuna right in the elbow with a 97-mile-an-hour fastball. I immediately thought at the time it was intentional, I still do, and I still think Mattingly was behind it. This incident was the first of 6 times between 2018 and 2021 that Marlins pitchers hit Ronald Acuna, and Mattingly was ejected in a July 2021 game when Marlins pitcher Pablo hit Acuna with the first pitch of the game. Now, I'm old school. I get that this has been, and in some ways continues to be, part of the game, but what pissed me off was not just that Mattingly's players were throwing at our star player, but the fact that it never appeared to be in retaliation for anything other than the fact that Ronald Acuna is very good at baseball. Further, the fact that it started with an intentional hit right in the elbow during a period when Acuna was chasing a record held by Mattingly just rubbed me absolutely the wrong way. If you can't get Acuna out, just walk him. Don't hit him, especially when he's one of the modern faces of the game, and unfortunately a player who, as we've seen, has been very susceptible to injuries. So I had to get on this soapbox because a lot of fans outside of Braves country are unaware of this saga and Mattingly's involvement in it. So I have to throw all this out there for everyone's consideration. Now, to be fair and stay objective, Throwing at players, again, is just part of the game, and there are many Hall of Fame managers who have done the same. If you haven't heard it yet, go check out Tommy Lasorda's famous Bavakwa rant on YouTube. When I'm having a bad day, that's a go-to video to cheer me up. Or for a really good story, listen to Hall of Famer Tom Glavine from the Atlanta Braves telling the story of fellow Hall of Famer manager Bobby Cox ordering him to throw at the next and final player on our list, Braves legend and my all-time favorite player, Dale Brian Murphy. Fans of this podcast know that Dale Murphy was the subject of my very first episode and the reason why I started this podcast in the first place. I've always thought that his absence from the Hall of Fame was a glaring omission, and I will continue to feel that way until hopefully this Sunday, when that long wrong can hopefully finally be righted. With Murph, I won't begin with the stats, I won't begin with the hardware, I won't even begin with the fame factor. I'll begin with a personal story about a young kid growing up in Atlanta, playing Little League and loving the game of baseball. A kid like many other kids in Atlanta in the 1980s, when life was simpler and baseball was life. Whenever our parents got tickets, we went to the game to see our Braves team, although it was tough to cheer for them because, frankly, the mid to late 80s Braves teams were not very good. After a second-place finish in 1984, the Atlanta Braves finished either 5th or 6th place every year between 1985 and 1990. But fans we were, and we still showed up to the ballpark, taking pride to know that the best player in the game, the two-time MVP, the 30-30 man, was on our team, and we were going to see him play. It made me proud to live in Atlanta. It made me proud to be a Braves fan, and it made me enjoy the game of baseball just a little bit more than I already did, and enjoy spending time with my family at the ballpark, and for that, I'll be forever thankful for Dale Murphy. How do you quantify the player who made you fall in love with baseball? It's impossible. There's no statistical analysis, no creative equation to capture hidden value, no means of measuring the power of a player who makes a generation of children fall in love with the game. If you've listened to this podcast all the way so far, I thank you for your time, and rather than engage in detailed player comparisons, I'll just take what I hope to be a victory lap of Dale Murphy's career as we await in just a few short days the news I've hoped for since Dale Murphy's name first appeared on a Hall of Fame ballot in 1999, the year after I graduated from high school. The news, hopefully, that Dale Murphy will be in the Hall of Fame. Dale Murphy played 18 years in Major League Baseball, most notably 14 years with the Atlanta Braves between 1976 and 1989. In a serendipitous twist of history, 1976 was the bicentennial of the United States of America, and also the year that Ted Turner purchased the Atlanta Braves and in an unprecedented move began broadcasting them nationally on his television station WTCG. By the end of the year, the channel's name was changed to Superstation WTBS, and the Braves were being called America's Team. Turner's move created Braves fans all over the country, and by the 80s, Dale Murphy was the friendly face of the nationally televised team. To this day, it's amazing how many Braves fans there are all over the country. Folks who grew up in Oklahoma, California, Utah, you name it, but they grew up watching Dale Murphy and the Braves. Rest assured, if Dale Murphy makes it into the Hall of Fame, the words America's Team will appear on his plaque, and for good reason. Baseball fans all over the country could tune in to watch Dale Murphy at his prime between 1980 and 1987, a period in which he was named to 7 All-Star teams, won 5 Gold Glove Awards in center field despite starting his career as a catcher, 4 Silver Slugger Awards, and MVP votes in 7 seasons, including 4 top 10 finishes, and most notably, back-to-back MVP awards in 1982 and 1983. During that 1983 MVP season, Dale Murphy became the first and still only player in Major League history to have a season with a 300 or higher batting average, 30 or more home runs, 120 or more RBI, 130 or more runs, 90 or more walks, and 30 stolen bases in one season. During those prime years of 1980 through 1987, Murph twice led the National League in home runs, RBI, and slugging percentage, and also led the league once in runs, walks, and OPS. He joined the 30-30 club in 1983 with over 30 home runs and 30 steals, and for his career, Murph hit over 30 home runs 6 times, including one season with a career-high 44 home runs in 1987, the same year he led all of Major League Baseball in intentional walks. Murph would retire with 398 home runs, still 60th best all-time, but 33 players ahead of Murph on that all-time list played after Dale Murphy retired, and many of them, including his ballot mate and all-time home run king Barry Bonds, were associated with PED use. So at the time of his retirement, 398 home runs was a more meaningful number than it may seem now, and indeed Murph has more career home runs than several of his slugging contemporaries, including Joe Carter, Dwight Evans, Hall of Famers Harold Baines, Johnny Bench, Jim Rice, Orlando Cepeda, Tony Perez, and Carlton Fisk. Dale Murphy retired with 2,111 hits, 1,197 runs, 1,266 RBI, 161 stolen bases, and a career batting average of .265, on-base percentage of .346, and a slugging percentage of .469. He had a career OPS of .815 with 3,733 total bases and a career WAR of 46.5. Of course, no discussion of Dale Murphy can end with just his accomplishments on the field. Off the field, Dale was awarded the prestigious Roberto Clemente Award in 1988, and I'll echo what I said in my first episode and what many others have said in numerous articles, social media posts, and conversations around the world for decades. Dale Murphy is a great guy and a great ambassador for the sport of baseball. He's a member of the Atlanta Braves Hall of Fame, where he has the MVP experience, a great opportunity where fans can watch the games with him. And he's involved in numerous humanitarian efforts, including Rome Humanitarian and his work with the Dale Murphy Foundation. If we're being fair, his career stats don't hit a lot of the common benchmarks that Hall of Fame voters, especially voters of previous generations, valued when voting for Hall of Fame members. Nevertheless, Dale Murphy had a good enough career and enough respect by voters to remain on the baseball writers' ballot all 15 years he was eligible. And this is now his 4th time on a Veterans Committee ballot. I've been saying it since last year. I think this is the year, and Dale Murphy is long overdue for enshrinement in the Hall of Fame for all of the reasons we've discussed, plus all of the reasons I mentioned on my first podcast, plus the following. Dale Murphy was one of the faces of baseball in the 1980s. Depending on where you lived and what team you cheered for, there's a lot of players that could be considered the face of baseball in the 80s, including his ballot mates Mattingly and Valenzuela, but also Hall of Famers Rickey Henderson, Mike Schmidt, Robin Yount, Cal Ripken Jr., George Brett, Wade Boggs, Tony Gwynn, Ozzie Smith, Ryan Sandberg, and some non-Hall of Famers, Darryl Strawberry, Jose Canseco, Will Clark, and even Bo Jackson by the late 80s. But only one of those players, Dale Murphy, was the face of a nationally televised franchise, and he's one of only 3 players that decade to win multiple MVP awards. The others are Mike Schmidt and Robin Yount, both of whom are in the Hall of Fame, and one of whom, Yount, has a vote this Sunday. I hope he votes for Dale Murphy. Not only was Dale the nationally televised face of America's team during this decade, but the stats back up his dominance during the 80s. During the years 1980 to 1989, Dale Murphy led all of MLB players in total bases with 2,796. Only Mike Schmidt had more home runs than Murph, and only Eddie Murray had more RBI than Murph. Murph had the 5th most hits during the period, the 4th most runs, and the 3rd most intentional walks. For all of these reasons we just mentioned, Dale Murphy has long been a fan favorite to get elected to the Hall of Fame. I'll end my discussion of Dale Murphy's Hall of Fame candidacy with some quotes on his website. If you don't think that my opinion's worth anything, that's fine. I want to read some quotes that other players, including many Hall of Famers, have said about Dale Murphy. Joe Torre, Hall of Fame manager and a former Braves manager, said, quote, "You can put him in a class with Mays and Aaron because he can beat you with his glove and he can beat you with a home run." Hank Aaron himself said at one time, "I'd say Dale Murphy is probably the best all-around player in either league, probably the most valuable player in baseball right now." Hall of Famer Don Sutton said, "Dale may be the only guy I know who could call 24 guys in one locker room a good friend." That just shows you what a great guy Dale was off the field. Nolan Ryan, I heard he's a pretty good pitcher. Hall of Famer Nolan Ryan said, "I can't imagine Joe DiMaggio was a better all-around player than Dale Murphy." Pete Rose said, "These days, anytime one of my pitchers keeps Murphy in the ballpark, I pat him on the fanny." All right, Pete. R.I.P. Pete Rose. So, if you don't have to take my word for it, I think that Dale Murphy is a Hall of Famer. I've always thought Dale Murphy is a Hall of Famer. And if there's one thing that I can do with this podcast, if I can convince anyone on the ballot, anyone that's voting this weekend to change their mind and make their vote for Dale Murphy, then hopefully this podcast will have achieved its purpose. Thank you. Before I go into a final part, thank you so much for listening so far. I've got kind of a bonus round for my special fans. What I'm going to do real quick is I'll give you my analysis of what I would like to happen and what I think would happen. I'm going to quickly break down the people who are voting this Sunday. What I would like to happen, obviously, first and foremost, is to see Dale Murphy get in the Hall of Fame. Everything else is secondary. What I think will happen is that Dale Murphy and Don Mattingly will get in the Hall of Fame for a lot of the reasons I discussed. Looking kind of past the stats and the hardware, although they have impressive stats and hardware, really at this idea of faces of the game in the 1980s. And in that respect, if I had a wish list, I would say that it would be great to see Murph, Mattingly, and Fernando Valenzuela all go in. Icons of 1980s baseball. That would be incredible. Briefly, I hope that Bonds, Clemens, and Sheffield don't get in this time round. I don't want to get onto a long soapbox, but I do think PED use is a bar for Hall of Fame admission now until we can kind of figure out what to do. I just feel like we haven't reached a consensus about what to do with those guys, and for the time being, I would hate to see them get in, especially if they took a spot away from Dale Murphy, because let's be honest, the reason why Clemens, Sheffield, and Bonds are on a Veterans Committee ballot and not first ballot Hall of Famers is because of the elephant in the room. So as far as I'm concerned, they're taking up space that another worthy player could have to get in the Hall of Fame, such as a Lou Whitaker or a Dwight Evans, who aren't even on this ballot. So I digress. That's what I think will happen. I think Murph and Mattingly will get in. I'd love to see Murph, Mattingly, and Valenzuela, but it's very rare that three people get on a Veterans Committee ballot. It's usually one. It's even rare, I think, when there's two. So anyway, here's what I think might happen based on who's voting. There's been an announcement. I've put it on my Twitter X. A lot of other journalists have shared it. The players who are voting this Sunday are Fergie Jenkins, Jim Cott, Juan Marichal, Tony Perez, Ozzie Smith, Alan Trammell, and Robin Yount. I'm going to go through, there's some players, there's some executives, there's some journalists here. I'm going to briefly go through just a kind of a bio here and tell you what, I'm trying to read a crystal ball here to see how these players would vote. Ferguson Jenkins, great Hall of Fame pitcher, once said that Mark McGwire should personally apologize to each and every pitcher he hit a home run off while using PEDs. In a 2009 interview with Jesus Melendez on Bleacher Report, Fergie took a similarly hardline stance against PEDs and specifically discussed Bonds and Clemens. He's gone on record as being against PEDs. In a 2017 interview with Mark Carman on Fansided, Fergie said steroids have been a, quote, black mark on baseball, and said that Sammy Sosa shouldn't be in the Hall of Fame. And this is at a time, I believe Fergie was actually a coach of the Cubs and worked with Sosa. So Fergie's also from Canada, which might fare well for Carlos Delgado. We'll see. But it sounds like, based on his statements, he probably wouldn't vote for Bonds, Clemens, and probably Sheffield. Now, on the other hand, Jim Kaat, great pitcher, just got in recently. In a 2008 interview with ESPN, Kaat discussed PEDs and took somewhat of a sympathetic stance. He recalled using pine tar on the ball to help get a grip during cold, wet Minnesota days, a trick he learned from Braves legend Johnny Sain. I've got an autographed picture of Johnny Sain in my office here, so I like spawn and Sain and pray for rain. There's a funny quote in this article, I got to share this, where veteran umpire Jim Honishik, later known for his role in the Miller Lite commercials with Boog Powell, once approached Kaat on the mound during a game and said, "Hey, quote, lefty, you're putting a foreign substance on the ball. That's illegal." To which Kaat quickly replied, "Jim, that's not a foreign substance. It's made in North Carolina." Whereupon Jim chuckled and went back to his position. Kaat goes on to say in other interviews, there's always been numerous tricks to help players enhance performance, and with regard to PEDs, he blames the administration and the players' union. So it's possible that Jim Kaat might take a sympathetic position to the PED players, and you might see a vote for Bonds or Clemens or Sheffield. We have also on the one of the voters on the ballot, Juan Marichal, former Giants pitcher, Hall of Famer. He's expressed sympathy for PED players. According to an article by John Shea in the San Francisco Standard, Marichal had this to say about PED players, quote, "I think that they have been unfair to guys who never were found guilty of anything. Their stats define them as immortals. That's the reality, and that cannot be denied." I would expect Marichal to vote for Bonds and possibly for Kent. I'm expecting Marichal to, they're fellow Giants. He's definitely going to vote for Bonds. I may not vote for Kent, but if he's voting for Bonds, then I could see him also voting for Clemens and maybe Sheffield. So there might be two votes there, Jim Kaat and Juan Marichal for Bonds. Tony Perez. In my head, I always think of Tony as a player from the 70s, but he played until 1986. So his career overlapped with Murph, Mattingly, Clemens, and Valenzuela. He played in the American League 1980 through 82, the National League from 83 to 86, Dale Murphy and Fernando Valenzuela's peak years. So Tony has great insight into Murph and Fernando Valenzuela since he played against them. Of note, Tony Perez batted .280 with 1 home run and 22 at-bats against Fernando Valenzuela. So we'll see. I think you could see Tony Perez maybe voting for Murph, for Mattingly, or Valenzuela. I'm not sure what his position is on PEDs, though. Ozzie Smith, though. Ozzie Smith played from 1978 through 1996, had a career which overlapped with every player on this ballot. In 97 plate appearances against Fernando Valenzuela, Ozzie Smith batted only .218 with 0 home runs and 8 strikeouts. He never faced Roger Clemens in the regular season, and by my research, he never faced him in an all-star game either. Now, Ozzie has been very, very vocal over the years against PEDs. Even back in 2005, 20 years ago, he remarked that, quote, "History is at stake. It's affecting people in that building," with regard to PEDs in the Hall of Fame. And he called on his fellow Hall of Fame members to take action because they, quote, "have a vested interest in the integrity of game." So, integrity of the game, I cannot see Ozzie voting for Bonds, Clemens, or Sheffield. Now, on his website, Dale Murphy has written a lot about Ozzie Smith. And I can say I met Dale Murphy at a Braves game earlier this year. If you follow me on Twitter X, I have the picture of us posted. It's pinned on my pinned tweet. I briefly discussed Andrew Jones' Hall of Fame case with Dale Murphy, and I said what a lot of other people said. I said, Andrew Jones is Ozzie Smith with power. Murph laughed. He loved that. And he said, something about Ozzie, and the way he said it made me think that the two of them are friends and know each other. So I don't know. Maybe I'm reading too much into this, but I can see Ozzie as someone who's going to take a vocal stand against PED players and perhaps stump for the players of his generation, Murph, Mattingly, and Venezuela, especially Murph and Fernando Valenzuela, since they played in the same league as Ozzie Smith. Now, a player that didn't play in the National League, played in the American League, was Alan Trammell. Now, Alan has long championed the Hall of Fame case for his teammate and friend Lou Whitaker, who's unfortunately not on this ballot. So he has a history of pulling for underdog candidates, and to be fair, Trammell himself was a bit of an underdog candidate, having been on 15 baseball writers' ballots himself and had to wait until 2017 when he was inducted by the Veterans Committee along with his teammate Jack Morris. So maybe Alan has some sympathy for Murph, who was also on 15 baseball writer ballots. Or maybe he has some sympathy for Jeff Kent, a fellow middle infielder. Now, one thing is clear, Alan Trammell clearly is in favor of his friend and teammate Lou Whitaker getting in the Hall of Fame. I've already seen a lot of talk on social media. Why isn't Lou Whitaker on this ballot? I'm trying to read the tea leaves here. I can't imagine Trammell is happy to have the ballot clogged with PED guys when his friend Lou Whitaker could be on this ballot. So I can't see him taking a sympathetic stance with the PED guys. Robin Yount is the last player who's going to be voting this Sunday. Now, Robin Yount and Murph were both two-time MVPs in the 80s, and both of them were MVPs in 1982. Murph in the National League, Yount in the American League. In a 2013 article by Kevin Mouseth for MLB.com, Yount commented on baseball's new drug policy, saying, quote, "It's very important to baseball that we get rid of this." He's also expressed perhaps some sympathetic viewpoints on PEDs, saying, quote, "Without testing in place, you would have almost been forced to do it to keep up. It wouldn't have been an easy decision, or maybe it would have been an easy decision for that matter. You just would have had to do it to keep up. I'm glad I didn't have to make that call because it would have been very difficult to decide whether to do it or not." Now, there's pictures of Robin Yount together with Murph recently, and they're both MVPs in 1982. So I could see maybe Yount voting for Murph. There's also some executives and journalists who are voting this Sunday, and to me, the executives are the wild card in this veteran committee vote. They don't really do a lot of interviews or make public comments on players, PEDs, etc. A lot of them aren't super active on social media, so it's kind of hard to read them in terms of how they might vote. One of them is Mark Adanasio. Mark is the principal owner of the Milwaukee Brewers. He's also a fellow attorney, having graduated from Columbia Law School in 1982, but I don't know how that impacts his voting philosophy. Mark has some personal experience with the issue of PEDs in baseball, having seen his former MVP Ryan Braun get suspended for PED use in 2011, after which he issued a statement saying, quote, "As a father, I take the use of prohibited substances seriously because I know the effects they can have on the body and on a person's life. I want the Milwaukee community to know that we support drug testing not only because it is MLB policy, but because it is the right thing to do." So I could see Mark taking a stance against the PED users who are on the ballot. Next executive is Doug Melvin. Doug is originally from Canada, which means maybe he'll be a fan of Carlos Delgado. Both him and Fergie Jenkins are in the Canadian Baseball Hall of Fame. He's previously served as the GM of the Texas Rangers and also the Milwaukee Brewers. Between Doug, Mark, and Robin Yount, there's a lot of Brewers folks voting this weekend. Melvin was the GM of the Brewers when Ryan Braun tested positive, and he also expressed his disappointment with Ryan in the media afterwards. Now, also voting is Artie Moreno. Of course, if you know this, he's the Angels owner, and he's the first Mexican-American to own a major sports team in the United States. So, it's very possible that he could be polling for former Angels pitcher and Los Angeles sports legend Fernando Valenzuela to get in the Hall of Fame. I could see Artie pulling for Fernando Valenzuela. Next one is Kim Ng. Kim Ng was the first female general manager in Major League history when she became the GM of the Miami Marlins in 2021. She served in this role from 2021 to 2023 and had previously served as the assistant GM of the New York Yankees from 1998 to 2001 and the Los Angeles Dodgers from 2002 to 2011. As such, you're probably already figuring this out if you're listening to this. Her career as an executive overlaps a ton with Don Mattingly's career as a coach and manager in LA and Miami, and she grew up in New York and New Jersey in the 70s and 80s. So my prediction is she is definitely a vote for Don Mattingly this weekend. Two more executives, Tony Reagans. Tony is a former executive with the LA Angels. Whether this means he'll be voting, forming a voting block with Artie Moreno, I don't know. I don't know how well they know each other or they're friends or whatever. But he's originally from California, graduated from Cal State Fullerton in 1988. So, again, I'm thinking maybe he was a Fernando Valenzuela fan growing up in California there. Not sure. So I could see Artie and Tony as a vote for Fernando Valenzuela. Final last executive is Terry Ryan. He's a former GM of the Minnesota Twins. He grew up in Wisconsin and also worked as an MLB scout. I don't know much about Terry, but his association with the Twins means maybe him and Jim Cott are, kind of a voting block, and Jim Cotta has expressed some sympathy for PED users. So maybe they might be another vote for Bonds Clemens. You never know. The last three people on the ballot, I'll keep this quick, media members and historians. First is Steve Hurt. He's executive vice president of the Elias Sports Bureau, and as such, he's been referred to by Bob Costas as the, quote, keeper of the stats. He's taken positions in the past with regard to comparing each era differently. I could be wrong, but I think he'd be open to PED guys getting in, but I think he would have an issue comparing steroid era guys against guys in the 80s. He has a lot of interviews and comments discussing how each era is different. I'm crossing my fingers, hopefully, that he's going to look at Fernando, Murph, and Mattingly and say, hey, let's put the faces of the 80s in. Could be wrong. Maybe he's focusing on the stats, and in which case, some of the stats don't necessarily favor those three guys, but maybe he'll get a twinkle in his eye at the fame factor of the three faces of baseball from the 80s. I don't know. Tyler Kepner is a senior writer for The Athletic. Now, former Braves correspondent David O'Brien is also a senior writer for The Athletic and has very publicly stumped for years for Dale Murphy's Hall of Fame candidacy. He's an open Braves fan. So I am hoping that Tyler's presence indicates some sympathy for Murph, as with the final member of the voting team this weekend, Jason Stark, who also writes for The Athletic. Now, he's voted for Bonds in the past, but he recently wrote a very good article about this ballot in which he describes Bonds and Clemens as, quote, the elephants in the room. And he also mentions Gary Sheffield's ties with Balco. In that same article, Stark has a section on Murph and Mattingly saying, quote, is it time to honor character and integrity? He discusses Kent, Delgado, and Valenzuela, but in my opinion, the tone of the article seems to imply that he's leaning towards voting Murph and Mattingly into the Hall of Fame. He also eloquently eulogizes Fernando Valenzuela, saying, quote, it's incredible that he has been retired for 28 years and has never made it into a ballot before. I could see Stark making an emotional plea for Murph, Mattingly, and Fernando Valenzuela, the faces of 80s baseball and some of the most well-liked and respected players from that era. And with that, I want to thank you again. This has been the longest episode I've ever done. We've got a huge weekend this weekend, and I am hoping that more so than anything, we can finally celebrate Dale Murphy getting into the Hall of Fame. Until then, remember, when life gets you down, stop what you're doing and watch a baseball game.